The seven Archons are the seven gods who preside over the regions of Teyvat, established after they emerged as the victors of the Archon War 2,000 years ago. Each Archon is associated with an element and an ideal by which they formed their territory's environment and determined their method of governance over their regions. As of the Fontaine Archon quest, only 6 Archon thrones remain. More on that later. Today, we're going to be breaking down all the Archons in Genshin Impact, the ideals they have, the lore and backstory of these Archons, and what they represent. So let's start with the first Archon we actually meet in the game. Barbatos, also known as the Archon of Mondstadt. He is the god of freedom, and the Seven's Anemo Archon. Despite being one of the original members of the Seven, and its second oldest member, after Rex Lapis, the freedom-loving god refuses to take direct control over his nation, instead choosing to wander the world, disguised as the free-spirited bard, Venti. As a result, he considers himself the weakest Archon, claiming they draw power from the amount of control they exert over their respective nations. Nevertheless, he still has many followers in Mondstadt, despite his lack of presence, and even has a church, called the Favonius Cathedral. Barbatos was once a tiny elemental spirit, and held no divine power. During the Archon War, the struggle between the gods Decarabian and Andreas caused the land of Mondstadt to be engulfed by ice and snow, leading this period to be known as the Age of Kings. At some point, the Wind Spirit befriended the nameless bard, who wished to see the world outside Decarabian's closed-off capital city. When the bard decided to raise a rebellion against the god, the Wind Spirit chose to help. They vanquished the tyrannical king after a fierce struggle, but the bard was fatally wounded in the process. Since Andreas at some point decided to relinquish his life to avoid becoming the Anemo Archon, Barbatos ascended to godhood to fill the position. He immediately used his new powers to take on the nameless bard's appearance to honor his memory. After becoming the Anemo Archon, Barbatos' first course of action was to make the land more hospitable for humanity. Plucking the nameless bard's lyre, he summoned wind to blow the ice and snow away, and split the mountains, drastically changing Mondstadt's terrain. Many of its eastern mountains were scattered into the ocean, although certain peaks are tall enough to be visible above water. Muskreath and the Golden Apple Archipelago are examples of such mountains. Barbatos also used storms to flatten the cliffs and valleys, causing Mondstadt's terrain to be filled with wide plains and rolling hills. He also guided warm monsoons to the region, changing it from a snowy wasteland to a verdant and fertile land. Ever since then, the people never had to worry about raising crops or surviving the cold, and thanks to the nation's growing conditions, it allows them to produce the best wine across Teyvat. After 1,600 years of history, Mondstadt's aristocracy had largely become tyrants. They were led by the Lorange clan, whose former pride in their ability to survive the harsh blizzards turned into arrogance. They enslaved outsiders, maltreated the common people, suppressed Mondstadt's history to hide their wrongdoings, and made a deal with Ursa the Drake to ensure their own safety, while sacrificing others. Ursa the Drake was a draconic creature that plagued the nation for over 1,000 years, until it was finally vanquished by the Second Harbinger. The prayers and cries of the disadvantaged awakened Barbatos, who helped put an end to the aristocracy's reign of terror. He personally intervened when Vanessa and her tribe, who were enslaved by the aristocracy, after seeking refuge in Mondstadt, were forced into an unfair fight against Ursa the Drake. Appearing in his divine form, Barbatos lent Vanessa his power, and drove away the monster, before calling out Lord Lawrence to make good on his promise to free her people. The aristocracy was overthrown and several noble houses, particularly the Lorange clan, were exiled from the city. Vanessa then founded the Knights of Favonius, and became its first Grand Master. Barbatos also officially established the Four Winds, consisting of the Wolf of the North, the Lion of the South, the Dragon of the East, and the Falcon of the West. Together, they built Mondstadt anew, and vowed to protect the nation. For the next Archon, we have Rex Lapis, also known as Morax, and the Archon of Leeway. He is the god of contracts, and the Seventh Geo-Archon. Similar to Venti, he was the Archon over Leeway, before revoking his providence during the Archon quest. He is the oldest of the seven, possibly being one of the oldest, if not the oldest god, at over 6,000 years old. He is covered in multiple legends, both true and exaggerated, often depicting him as an all-conquering, powerful deity. How he came to be is currently unknown. However, he descended to Teyvat more than 6,000 years ago. Before the Archon War, Morax was already known as the Lord of Geo. He was close with the god of dust, and they formed a settlement for their people in Guili Plains, which was named after them. However, after the Archon War broke out, the god of dust perished in a battle that laid waste to Guili Plains and Dihu Marsh. Afterward, Rex Lapis moved their people south, to the place that is now Liyue Harbor. To protect his new city, Morax formed a contract with the Adepti to defend the harbor, as he continued waging war against his many enemies. At some point, he befriended a massive dragon and gave it sight, who became his lifelong friend, but the dragon eventually deteriorated from erosion, and he was forced to seal his old friend away. After defeating the other gods in the war, he sealed them underground, where their physical bodies decomposed, and became one with the earth. Their souls, however, were immortal. Their desire for revenge, and lust for life seeped into the earth, resulting in miasmas, plagues, and other such calamities. To quell these disturbances, Morax summoned the Yakshas to aid him in battle, endlessly subduing the ancient gods. As the Archon War came to a close 2,000 years ago, Morax emerged as one of the 7 victors. The 7 would occasionally dine together in Liyue. 2 millennia later, only Barbatos and Morax remained as the original Archons amongst the 7. The other 5 died and were eventually replaced. Morax's level of involvement in the Cataclysm 500 years ago is currently unknown, but he is aware of how greatly it affected the Cryo-Archon. An unknown party later made a contract with him, in which he would not disclose the truth of the incident to anyone. Raiden Makoto, also known as Ball, was the original Archon of Inazuma, and predecessor to her younger twin sister, Ei. She was the 7th Electro-Archon, and her divine ideal was also eternity, but rather than Ei's pursuit of solemn stillness, Makoto cherished each moment, within time and space. Raiden Makoto and Raiden Ei were identical twin gods, who lived during the time of the Archon War. While Ei was a far more formidable warrior than the peaceful Makoto, she believed Makoto to be a better ruler for humanity. After prevailing and slaying all their rivals, Ei willingly sacrificed her body, so Makoto could ascend to Celestia, and become one of the 7. After becoming the first Electro-Archon, Makoto recreated Ei's body, and made Ei her body double. As far as the world was aware, there were not 2 gods, but 1. They complemented each other, and they ruled Inazuma jointly. Therefore, there was no need for the public to know the truth. All those who dwelled in the nation lived in peace. However, at some point after creating Watatsumi Island, the god Orobashi attacked Inazuma with his followers, due to having been sentenced to death by Celestia for reading the book Before Sun and Moon, which recorded history that they wanted hidden. Raiden Ei rallied the shogunate forces against the god and his followers. In the ensuing war, she killed Orobashi with such force that it created a slash in the ground. Neither Ei nor Makoto were aware of the true motive behind Orobashi's attack. The 2 would live in relative peace until the Cataclysm, 500 years before the start of the game. When monsters began appearing across Inazuma and leaving mass trails of destruction in their wake, Makoto headed to Conria alone, without informing her sister, as she was compelled to do so. By the time she had arrived, Makoto was already dying, much to Ei's horror, although the former Archon was able to preserve some of her consciousness. After returning from Conria, Ei assumed her sister's position, in both as the shogun and a member of the 7, with no one knowing any better. She used the powers of the sacred Sakura to eliminate all of the monsters plaguing Inazuma, bringing peace back once more. The new Electro-Archon believed that Makoto had his Taroth involved in the creation of the sacred seed, and that without her intervention, Inazuma would have been consumed by the darkness. The incident left her deeply scarred from erosion. At some point after the Cataclysm, she created an experimental puppet as a proof of concept to see if she could escape erosion, which was Skara. She had wished to use him to store her gnosis, but it had cried upon its creation, causing her to believe that he'd be too gentle for the task. Taking pity on him, she decided to seal his powers and leave him in a slumber in the Narukami Shrine. She soon had a puppet version of herself created, making sure that it followed her ideals. Satisfied with her work, she gave her gnosis to Miko, before removing her consciousness from her body, after she made sure she had a way to get out, if it was ever required. This way, her people wouldn't be in danger of transgressing the heavenly principles, like Conria, and being punished for it. She herself would survive as their permanent god, by preserving her consciousness, free of erosion, and would also have an indestructible artificial body, so that her people wouldn't suffer the loss she herself experienced when Makoto died. Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, also known as the God of Wisdom, was the original Archon of Sumeru, and the predecessor to the current Dendro Archon, Lesser Lord Kusanali. Like her successor, Greater Lord Rukkhadevata held the title of God of Wisdom. It is unknown when, or how, the Greater Lord came into being, but in the earliest legends involving her, she was the princess of an area where the forest still thrived, before the heavenly principles turned Sumeru into a desert. A Seelie survivor, known as the Goddess of Flowers, heard about Rukkhadevata's wisdom, and was impressed by the princess' answers to her riddles. The two forged an alliance, that also included King Deshret, who was co-ruling with the Goddess of Flowers, and chose to share his throne with them, during the Archon War. The three were then known as the Three Eternal Companion Gods. Rukkhadevata co-reigned with them in the desert, with each focusing on a different aspect of their civilization, and this era was remembered by their subjects as one of peace. At some point, the Goddess of Flowers foresaw the coming of the cataclysm, and realized that humanity might not survive on its own, so she informed the Greater Lord of the future she saw, and entrusted the other with a part of herself. The Goddess of Flowers understood and embraced her fate, to die, leading King Deshret on the path of understanding forbidden knowledge, despite knowing that his endeavors were pointless, in hopes of one day overturning the heavenly principles. Hearing of their plans, and finding them unacceptable, Rukkhadevata broke ties with both of them, and returned to the forest, to pursue her own ideals of wisdom. Though the Goddess of Flowers waited for her to return, she never did, leaving King Deshret to rule his people alone, following the goddess's death. After her falling out with the two, she nurtured a rainforest, with the Varuna contraption. With the help of her followers, they would go on to establish the Sumeru Academia, revive a flourishing rainforest, and expand it further. Sumeru City was built on the Divine Tree, a particularly massive tree, located in Sumeru's forest region. After some time pass, King Deshret's pursuit of his ideal world led him to inadvertently release forbidden knowledge into his kingdom. People heard whispers in their heads, and the disease known as El Lizar, the manifestation of the withering on human bodies, began to spread. Rukkhadevata came to their aid, on account of her old friendship with Deshret. She gathered the people, instructing them to build temples, into which she infused the divine power of life, to suppress the forbidden knowledge. Doing so, expended a great deal of her power, and caused her to regress into a childlike form. Even this, however, was not enough. In the end, King Deshret sacrificed himself, to finally put an end to the outbreak. 500 years before the start of the main story, Conria's increasing use of forbidden knowledge culminated in an overflow of abyssal powers and monsters into Teyvat. These abyssal monsters wreaked havoc on Sumeru, and the withering spread uncontrollably throughout both the forest and the desert. To put an end to the devastation, Greater Lord Rukkhadevata embarked on a final journey with some of her followers, and never returned. At the moment of her death, Rukkhadevata was at Irminsul, which she had been tasked with protecting. Unlike the other members of the Seven, she was not summoned to participate in the war against Conria, since protecting Irminsul was a more important task. The pollution of forbidden knowledge occurred alongside the disaster, and it had already invaded the tree. This caused great distress to the Greater Lord. She created the Akasha system, to borrow her citizens' wisdom in the form of their dreams, to aid her in solving the crisis, and used her divine strength to purge the forbidden knowledge, much like how she once drove it back, during the incident with King Deshret. However, she realized that because she was the avatar of Irminsul, when forbidden knowledge corrupted the tree, it had corrupted her very existence as well. Even if she died, she would live on in memories, and this meant that the tree could not be fully purified of forbidden knowledge. Because it was impossible for Rukkhadevata to erase herself, she created Lesser Lord Kusanali, also known as Nahida, from the purest branch of Irminsul, to be her incarnation in the next cycle. She planned for the Lesser Lord to eliminate her, so that the forbidden knowledge can also be removed. She left behind a trail of clues, starting with the phrase, "Let the world completely forget me." Egeria, also known as the Mistress of Many Waters, was the original Archon of Fontaine, and the predecessor of its latest Archon, Focalor. She was the god of justice, and the Seven's Hydro-Archon. A legend states that after the Dragon of Water was removed from its position as the heart of the primordial sea, one of the four shades of the heavenly principles created Egeria as the primordial sea's new heart. Despite the heavenly principle's alien origins, Egeria's substance and essence were formed entirely from material, originating from Teyvat. At the time, no divine duty had been assigned to her. The first Oceanid was born after Egeria shed the first tear, which then gave birth to all other Oceanids. Egeria bestowed a task to her creations, to seek an understanding of the diverse array of species, and to love every creature. Following their master's desire to connect everyone in the world, thus dispersed across the waters of Teyvat, to act as spies. Some of Egeria's followers soon desired to live on the surface, having seen human life. Not wanting to refuse her followers, Egeria decided to fulfill the request herself, taking water from the primordial sea and inserting it into the Oceanid's blood vessels, thus creating humanoid forms for them to walk on land. This action did not go unnoticed by Celestia, who deemed it a sin and sentenced her to be sealed for her crimes, claiming that a prophecy would come to dissolve the people of Fontaine in order to wash their sins away. After Remuria was destroyed, a historical nation from Fontaine, ruled by the god King Remus, Celestia commanded Egeria to return from her prison, to take over Remus' position and rule Fontaine. Egeria returned to Fontaine and gathered the survivors and instructed them to establish new cities around flowing springs, thus commencing an era guided by law that has endured to the present day. She then ascended as the Hydro-Archon and became one of the seven. She exiled all of the criminals from her nation, who lived in misery, as they were shunned by society. Eventually, some of these criminals begged for forgiveness. Egeria granted their wish for redemption, ordering them to guard her secret beneath the waves, which they did. This resulted in the construction of the fortress of Maripide, a living place for them, with its main purpose to stop the path leading to the primordial sea. While knowing she could not make an enemy of the divine, Egeria did not want harm to befall her followers, because of the prophecy. She assigned Focalor, one of her Oceanid followers, to be her successor, hoping that she would be able to concoct a plan to deceive Celestia. 500 years prior to the events of the main story, the cataclysm began. Egeria was among several gods who ventured to combat the forces of the abyss, spewing forth from the rift. However, she was eventually slain during the conflict, and her body was subsequently turned into a pool of pure dew. As of her command, Focalor was instated in her place as the Hydro-Archon sometime afterward. She herself was also an Oceanid, transformed into a human by Egeria. Sadly, the other Oceanids, including the strongest among them, did not recognize Focalor as the new Hydro-Archon. This change, in addition to their discovery of what remained of their former god, led the Oceanids to exile themselves from Fontaine and cut all ties. After she ascended, Focalor spent a long time on the ocean floor, devising a plan to subvert the prophecy. Eventually, she concluded that she needed to deceive the heavenly principles into thinking the prophecy was happening, while actually saving all Fontainians. To this end, she separated her divinity from her body and spirit, and named her human body that she left behind, Farina. Focalor saw Farina as essentially a human version of herself, as well as exactly the kind of human she wished to be. Focalor placed a curse upon Farina, making her immortal as long as her divinity existed, but also preventing her from pursuing her own happiness. She had Farina deceive the people of Fontaine and the heavenly principles by pretending to be the Hydro-Archon, day in and day out, for 500 years. If she ever allowed her true identity as an impostor of the Hydro-Archon to be revealed, Focalor's plan would fail, and the prophecy would doom her people. Meanwhile, Focalor kept her noses in her divine half, and hid inside the
Oratrice mécanique d'analyse cardinale,
accumulating indemnitium in the device. When the time came, she planned to use the accumulated energy to not only eliminate herself, but destroy the Hydro Archon's divine throne, returning the stolen Hydro authority to the Dragon of Water. To that end, she had a letter sent to Neuvillette, the current incarnation of the Hydro Dragon, inviting him to assume the position of Fontaine's Chief Justice. She hoped that he would come to sympathize with humanity, so that when the time came for Focalor to return Neuvillette's stolen authority, he would be willing to use his regained powers to turn the people of Fontaine into true humans, saving them from the prophecy. Despite all odds, her plans worked. Murata, also known as the Lady of Fire, and the Archon of Natlan. She is the god of war, and the Seven's Pyro Archon. There have been at least 2 Pyro Archons, but Murata's position in the history of Natlan is unclear, and there is not enough information to determine whether she is the current Archon or not. She was the Pyro Archon before Venti disappeared from Mondstadt, and his remarks about her indicate that the two were very familiar with each other. During the end days of Mondstadt's aristocracy, 1,000 years ago, Venti was awakened and became acquainted with Vanessa, who was then an enslaved gladiator from Natlan. He immediately identified her as a children of Murata, and told a confused Vanessa about the god. When questioned why her elders had not taught her about their Archon, Vanessa informed him that her tribe had spent generations wandering the plains. Her ancestors prioritized passing down the art of combat, and over time, her tribe lost touch with their past and history, let alone their god. Little is known about Murata or her reign, outside of Venti and Vanessa's brief conversation about her, where Venti also mentions that all of Murata's people have fiery red hair and hardy bodies. The Tsaritsa is the Archon of the Snezhnaya. Her corresponding ideal is currently unknown, and the Seven's Cryo Archon. At some point in the history of the Seven, the Tsaritsa inherited her position from the previous Cryo Archon. She is not one of the original members of the Seven, who emerged victorious at the end of the Archon War. When and how she ascended to the position of an Archon is yet unknown, but it was some time before the Cataclysm 500 years ago, which left her deeply changed. With supreme rule over Snezhnaya, she uses her loyal followers to manipulate and intimidate the other nations of Teyvat. She is targeting the other Archon's Gnosis, for reasons unknown, though it likely relates to her goal of burning away the old world. She also has the ability to grant her subjects a power separate from visions, called delusions. Among the Seven, the Tsaritsa's ideal is currently the only one left unconfirmed. However, it is suspected to be love. In the Teyvat story chapter preview, Dainsleif states that she is a god with no love left for her people, nor do they have any left for her, in the opening sentence of the Snezhnaya chapter, where he mentions the Archon's ideals in their respective chapters. In addition, Zhongli avoids mentioning her ideal, whereas he mentions the others, suggesting it may have changed during the Cataclysm. Wanderer also mentions her love as another form of sin. Nothing is known about the Tsaritsa's appearance, besides the fact that she uses a female vessel. Her gaze is described as cold but pure, and it is also suggested she wields a scepter. With that is every Archon that we know in Genshin Impact, as of right now. There will likely be more Archons that are revealed in the future, like the second Pyro Archon, or the original Cryo Archon, that supposedly won in the Archon War. But for now, which Archon is your favorite, and what do you guys think about them? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. Give a like if you ended up enjoying this video, and subscribe to see more of my future videos. Bye.